Before removing the battery unit in a SAMI and replacing it, you're going to need to have a few tools gathered to go through the procedure. You're going to need a 9/64 hex tool, a 3/32 hex tool, a small wire cutter, the battery unit from Sunburst sensors, and a plastic wedge, something similar if possible. If not, what you can use is a large, broad screwdriver. You do not want to use a small, sharper screwdriver. That can damage the SAMI. One example is you can take a large, broad head and wrap it in a couple of wraps with a paper towel to help pad it for accessing the inside of the instrument. After you have the tools that you need, the first step will be to take your, cut the zip ties holding the brass cage in place that's closing the instrument. So if you cut the bottommost set, you should be able to then remove the zip ties, and then the brass cage to gently work it down over the instrument so you can access the inner area. Next, what you'll need is your 9/64 hex tool. And inside there are 3 bolts that you'll need to remove for the end cap. Each of the SAMI 2 units has 2 small little clefts that you can use. If you have a wedge tool or something similar, that's the best to use. That's blunt to put in here to help wedge the lid open. If you don't have something similar, before you can take a screwdriver that's blunt, have it wrapped, covered in paper towel, so you can press that in there and gently use to lift the lid. You don't want to lift too quickly. Once you have the unit free sliding. After you get the lid opened, what you want to find is the side with the electronics. You'll see an internal support rod and the wiring visible. Do you lift it a few inches? What you can find is a 4-pin connector that's braided on the right side of the unit. There's a small clasp. Hit that, press the clasp, and you can gently work it loose. And then also out of the lid, there is a red and black wire with a 2-pin connector that you can just gently pull apart as well. At this point, you can hold these wires to the side, lift carefully, and the lid is free. Make sure that if you're putting these down that you're careful of the wires and you don't crimp them or set the lid on them. Now the next step for removing the battery is you need to have your 3/32 hex tool, and there's 3 bolts on the top of the unit that are holding the top plate in place. Underneath of this plate, there should be a small piece of foam that helps pad the battery in place. Make sure you don't lose this. The next stage that you want to do is the battery feeds into the wiring on the front. Disconnect this 2-pin connector. On one side of the unit, on the battery strap, there should be another small hex nut to remove. At this point, you should be able to just gently move this out of the way and slide the battery over the lip and out of the unit. Now you simply need to slide the replacement battery back into place and reverse the steps you just followed. Holding with both hands is a good idea with the battery strap, as it can have a little bit of tension on it. Replace the foam padding and move the battery wiring over the top of the circuit board and reconnect to the same connector you had the previous one hooked to. You can tell the correct side of the lid to use as the top side has indentations for the heads of the bolts to fit into as opposed to the other side. You have two short ones which fit on the sides and the long bolt that goes into the internal support rod. At this point, you're ready to close the unit back up. What you want to do is line up the bolt holes in the lid, well with the three that are in the main body of the unit. So gently hook these inside on the catch. Set this. Gently hold it with my other arm. At this point, replace the 4-pin connection. Replace the 2-pin connection. Best done behind the support rod so that the wiring doesn't get in the way. Tuck this in gently. Slide it down slowly and carefully to make sure you don't catch on any of the internal components. The closing of the instrument is one of the most important concerns at this point. There is this O-ring that is responsible for keeping the unit sealed. If this is damaged, as we were discussing earlier, when you're removing it, before fully closing the instrument, take a moment and look at the O-ring to make sure the integrity is intact and that there's no gouging or damage to the unit. If there is, you should contact Sunburst Sensors, and there is a high likelihood that if you attempted to use the instrument at this point, it would flood the electronics section. That's why the removal and being careful with the tools is the most important part of the opening and closing of the unit. Now, what you want to do, the best way to get the unit closed up and ready is you work it gently down, and you can take the bolts and just enough to catch them to make sure that you have a good alignment on the instrument. Recommend going around doing all three. When you look at it straight on, you can see that it's directly up and down, it's not leaning. And this also helps give just a little bit of direction for when you go to close the instrument. You do not want to attempt to use the screws to pull this shut. It will damage, it can strip the holes, it can damage the lid and also make it much more prone to flooding. So once you have the alignment from either set on the ground or from above, with gentle, firm, even pressure, push the lid back in place. And also, now you tighten the bolts back into place, but you only need to go to basic tension. As soon as it gives you resistance, it's tightened. You don't need to excessively tighten the bolts. What you can do now is simply work this gently back up and around the lid of the SAMI. You can slide this back into place. If necessary, you can use zip ties. We use 4-inch miniature cable ties or zip ties to close the brass cage. If necessary, you can take some, if you had to remove too many or you believe the unit is a little exposed, put several bends in so that it's rounded. And then you can hook through. Push through the instrument brass cage. that's how you change the battery.